Hello everyone and welcome to our video on macro recording. So this is one of the commonly requested topics that I see from the comments and from my students as well in my classes. So maybe it's time to create a video about this. So the first thing we're going to do is define what macros are in Excel. So macros are a set of actions that the user stores in an Excel file or as an add-in to Excel itself. So it's like saving the clicks, saving the procedures that you do or that you perform in a file for so that you can execute it later. So the host program, in our case Excel, will be able to read the macro and execute it for a later time or for your repetitive use. So as you could see, there's a sense of automation when you have macros in your files. You do not have to perform the same tasks over and over again because you have this saved set of actions in your Excel file. Now, there are two ways that we can do to create macros in MS Excel. So the first one is via recording. So in this method, the user performs the tasks or set of actions, which then Excel will save. And then Excel will be able to execute it later. So therefore, macros using recording are very easy to do. You don't have to learn programming at all. You don't even have to have advanced Excel skills to do this. You simply have to make sure that you know the steps that you want to record in your recording, and you're good to go. You can start the recording process and trigger it later. The next method in creating macros is by use of programming. So programming using VBA or Visual Basic for applications, you can also create a macro by writing down or typing down the set of instructions that the program, that is MS Excel, can understand. So instead of you performing the tasks literally, you give Excel a series of commands that it will be able to read. So this gives programming far more flexibility because you're not limited to just what you can click. However, VBA programming can be difficult and it will take some time to learn. You will not be able to learn it in just a few minutes or maybe even a few months. So you really have to invest your time if you really want to learn uh, VBA programming. Well, you can sort of like have an idea on how to program, but to be able to create complex programs, it will take some time for that. So recording is probably one of the easiest ways to automate tasks in Excel. And maybe later, once you're already good with recording, you can then explore the world of VBA programming. So hopefully in the future, you can join me in um, creating programs using VBA programming in future videos. So I would ask you to subscribe and hit the bell button so that you could be informed once I upload a video about VBA programming. Now, like what I said, there are limitations to macro recording because you can only record actions or tasks resulting from the clicks of your tools and keyboard entries. You cannot record logic and loops. So macro recording will only perform the task exactly as how you performed it. It doesn't even know why you are, let's say, turning a cell yellow, or it doesn't even know why you have to create a pivot table. It doesn't know why you have to expand the width of a certain cell. It just knows that it has to do it because these are the steps that you recorded. So no logic involved. It will just go with the flow. It won't even know if you're making a mistake. Recording also cannot do loops or iteration. So meaning you cannot have the task repeat like 1,000 times on its own. The number of times that you perform a certain task is the same as the number of times that it will execute later. In programming, you can just code one task and let the code determine how many times it has to be executed, depending on certain conditions that you have to set. So that would be looping. So that's something that you cannot do in macro recording. So let's start by creating macro recording, and maybe in the future, we will learn about VBA programming as well. So now let's perform macro recording. So I have this file here, and my goal is to have the data from the three worksheets, Team 1, Team 2, Team 3, consolidated in this worksheet. So let's say that I want to make sure that next time that I have to do this very same procedure, I could just execute the macro and it will just perform the task. So to start, we need to have the developer tab. Now, it's not a surprise if your Excel doesn't have the developer tab because it's actually not going to show up by default. So if you do not have the developer tab, you have to go to File, and then under File, you have to go to Options. Once you are in File Options, you need to go to Customize Ribbon. In the Customize Ribbon tab, you should see on the right side, Developer. So mine is already checked, and if yours is not, you have to check that. And then click OK. That should pull up the Developer tab. So this tab contains most of the tools that programmers use in order to automate tasks in Excel. So you could see here that you have macros, you have Visual Basic or the VBA, and to control the security and so on. Now we're ready to record. We already have the Developer tab. So the first thing you have to do if you're going to record a macro is you have to make sure that your cursor is correctly positioned in the worksheets. So imagine yourself recording a song or recording a dance number. You have to position yourself correctly. So you have to make sure that your cursor is correctly placed so that when you are already recording, you don't have to record, okay, the action of correcting the cursor's position. So in my case here, I want to make sure that in all my worksheets, the active cell is cell A1. That's the logical starting point. Take note, it's not always cell A1 that you have to click. It really depends on your file. It's just in my case, it would be the best option to make sure that in all my worksheets, the cursor is at cell A1, even the consolidated worksheet here. So my worksheet is now ready to record. So I will go to the developer tab and then I will click this one, use relative reference. So by clicking this, it ensures that the macro can execute in another cell later on. So most of the time you have to click this, especially if you want your macro to run in a different cell later on. If you don't want your macro to just execute on a specific cell, okay, you want to click this one. As you can see, the keyword here is relative, the opposite of absolute. So once it's clicked, nothing will really pop up, but you will notice that it will actually stay clicked. And now we're ready to start the recording. So under the developer tab, you should see there, record macro. So we click this. And before the recording actually starts, we have to provide some information for our macro. So the first thing is we have to provide a macro name. So for the macro name, you could use any name that you want, but just make sure that you don't put a space. So in our case, I will just name it Consolidator. No spaces allowed here. And it doesn't have to be in all caps. Okay. The next field is a shortcut key. When we automate things, it doesn't mean that it will move on its own. Though technically you can in programming, but in macro recording, you have to assign a certain trigger for the macro to run. One of the triggers is by use of a shortcut key. There are other triggers out there, but for our video right now, we're just going to use a shortcut key. Just make sure that you don't assign the macro to an existing shortcut like Control C or Control X or Control V, because your macro can actually take over that shortcut key. So if you assign it under Control X, then that means that your cut command will be taken over by this macro, at least for Windows. If you record the macro in Mac, it won't allow you to record if the shortcut key is already assigned to a native action. So for now, I'll just use Control Q. Store macro in this workbook. We don't want the macro to be stored somewhere else, but in this workbook specifically. Description is optional. You don't have to write anything here unless you want to like tell yourself in the future what this macro is all about. And then you click OK. So the moment you click OK, your Excel starts recording. Any action that you do is being recorded. So this is the time that you should not be performing any other actions in Excel within this file other than what you're supposed to be recording. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use our cursor or our mouse to navigate to the worksheet Team 1. Take note, I'm recording this action, but you can record any action that you want. Okay, I'm just using this as an example. Now, I will highlight the cells that I want to be part of the recording. So I want these cells to be copied. So Control C, and then I will go to the Consolidated tab, and then I will arrow down, and then paste, Control V. So all of those actions are being recorded by Excel. Now, I want to prepare to paste the data from the second worksheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click arrow up just once so that it goes back to cell A1 and then navigate my way to team 2. So here, I'm going to do the very same action. I'm going to highlight A2 to B5. And maybe by now you're wondering, what if in the future, the next time that I have to do this file again, will the macro capture any additional rows? The thing is, the way that I am recording it right now, it will only capture this specific cells, A2 to B5. That's how macros work. It will perform later exactly as how I'm recording it. So if I am highlighting A2 to B5, then those cells will be the only cells that will be highlighted later on. It won't be able to pick up any other rows. That is one of the limitations of macro recording. Okay? So later, I will share to you how you can counter this, at least for this scenario. Okay? So for now, I'll keep recording it in such a way that I'm highlighting cells specifically. Copy, go to Consolidated. I need to navigate my way to cell A5. So I could actually just use the cursor and click A5 and then paste. And then I will navigate to team 3, do the same thing, highlight, copy, go to Consolidated, go to cell A9 and paste. And at this point, I'm actually done with the recording. So I can now go to the Developer tab and stop the recording. So let's see if I was successful in performing the recording. So I will remove this first. And then, just like how we recorded it, I have to position the cursor at cell A1. Remember, the macro relies on the exactness of the recording. So if we recorded the macro with cell A1 as the starting cell of each worksheet, then we must also position it that way when we are about to execute the macro or run the macro. You don't have to do this in programming. That is why programming is, well, more powerful than recording, because you don't have to like click A1 every time you want to start the recording. But for now, since our lesson right now is all about macro recording, so let's stick with just recording it. And now I already managed to position the cursor correctly at cell A1, and I am going to execute the macro. So I will position myself here in consolidated because this is where I started the recording as well, right? Remember, it's all about exactness. So I will trigger the macro using Control Q. And as you could see, I was able, or macro was able to execute the task again. So that's how macros are done. You already recorded the set of actions, and now Excel can execute it later. So I will save the file before I explain some more things. So let's go File, Save As, because you have to change the file type to Excel macro enabled workbook. If you attempt to save the file without changing the file type, you will actually get a warning that it's not allowed to be saved as XLSX file format because, well, that's the rule. You cannot save a file that has a macro if you're going to use SLSX. So if ever you accidentally saved, then just click no. It will go, or it will bring you to the save as, and then you can change the file type to Excel macro enabled workbook and then save. So let's see if the macro will be able to capture any additional data. Okay, so let's say that in the first worksheet, I will put here Donnie and then 150 sales. So I will again position the cursor at cell A1 of each of the worksheets and see if it will be able to capture the new row in my data. So Control Q, as you could see, it did not capture the entry that I have here. And actually, if you go to team 1, you can see here that it only highlighted this specific set of cells. That is because in our recording, we were very specific, right? That only these cells A2 to B4 will be recorded. And that's how macros work. If you want to have a workaround, okay, about this, well, we should have recorded it in a different way. So during the recording process, we should not have highlighted just the cells, as in using your mouse or your cursor. You should have used shortcut keys. So I could have recorded it this way. I could have went from A1, arrow down, Control Shift down, Control Shift right, and this will capture any additional rows. Because what I recorded is the clicking of Control Shift down and Control Shift right. I did not record highlighting specific cells. I recorded the Control Shift down shortcut key, which will capture any additional row in my data. And then when I'm going to consolidate it, I should have used Control down and then arrow down. So let me do that real quick. So again, I will position the cursor at cell A1 of each of the worksheets, position myself at consolidated, go to developer, and click record macro. I will provide a name. So I will say just consolidator version 2, no spaces allowed. I cannot use Control Q anymore. So I will use, let's say, Control W. And then I will start the recording process. So click OK. And at this point, again, it's being recorded. So I go to team 1, and then I will arrow down, Control Shift down, Control Shift right. So what's recorded is the action of doing that. And that action actually ensures that you will capture additional rows later on. And then copy, go to consolidated. And then at this point, for this one, I simply have to arrow down and paste. Prepare for the next data. So I will arrow up and then go to team 2. Do the same procedure with shortcut keys, not highlighting of cells. So arrow down A2, Control Shift down, Control Shift right, copy, go to consolidated. I have to find my way to that blank cell under A6 without clicking A6. Okay? Because remember, your data can change, right? So now I only have 4 rows, but what if later I have 5? So I have to find a way to record going to that blank cell under the name Donnie without clicking the mouse or clicking the cursor. I have to use shortcut keys again. So the shortcut key that can send us there would be control down, that will send me here, and then arrow down, that will send you to the next blank cell. Control down from A1, and then arrow down, and then paste. So control V. I will prepare myself for the third data. So I will arrow up again. So later it's easier to go control down and arrow down. So I will go to team 3. I will do the same procedure, arrow down, control shift down, control shift right, and then copy, go to consolidated, and then find my way to that blank cell again by using control down, arrow down, right, and then paste. So I now manage to consolidate all my 3 worksheets. So I will stop the recording, go to developer, stop recording. So let's see if we manage to record it correctly. So I will clear contents, position our cells at cell A1 of each of the worksheets. That's how we recorded it. So that's how we execute it as well. Control W, right? And as you could see, it managed to consolidate the data again. Now let's try to add data. Okay. So let's say that I will add data under Bruce. I will put here Wilfred, for example, and then 150 as well. So now I have a new row in the third worksheet, and let's see if I will be able to capture that one when I execute the macro again. So Control W, and because our recording was that of Control Shift down, as you could see, it managed to capture the additional row of data. So when you record, you have to think about what to click exactly. Are you going to highlight specific cells? Or are you going to highlight Control Shift down for the sake of variability later on? Maybe later it's going to be shorter, maybe later it's going to be longer. So you may want something that is not fixed, like a Control Shift down action. So I will save this now that I have my recording. So that is how we create macro recordings. So this file can now do the same tasks again and again. Well, only if you have 3 worksheets exactly named as Team 1, Team 2, Team 3. If you add more teams to your data, unfortunately, our recording will not be able to capture that because when we recorded it, it was only just these 3 worksheets, right? Okay. And FYI, when you perform a task via recording, you cannot undo it. Okay. So that's why if you notice, I keep on using clear contents instead of just using Control Z. Because when you execute a task using macros, the history of undo will actually be disabled or will be deleted. So I will Control W again just to show you. Right now, the undo is active, meaning there's something I could undo. And then I will Control Q, but I'll make sure first that I'm at A1. Okay. Control W. Okay. So as you could see, the undo button is disabled. I cannot undo it. I cannot Control Z. That's just how it works. If you need to reverse an action performed by a macro, you have to reverse it yourself, as in literally reverse the action yourself. Okay, so I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you start recording because this is the first step towards programming. Okay, so in our next video, I hope to see you there. Please don't forget to hit subscribe and the like button so you can be alerted if we have new videos in our channel. Thank you, guys.